Hi, I'm Shelley Wood, the managing editor for TCTMD. This is On Record, a regular program looking at hot topics in interventional cardiology and beyond. My guest today is a cardiologist, a geneticist, a futurist, looking at sort of the potential of digital medicine and wireless health, AI. Today I want to talk to you as a writer, Dr. Eric Topol. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Shelley. Going back 20 years since I first met and worked with you.
That's right.
So, yeah,
no,
wow.
I was just a cub reporter. I was thinking, I think of you as a mentor in many ways, but I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. But what you did for me really early in my career was you always knew what was going to be exciting as news. And what's exciting as news is often what's exciting in medicine more generally. So I'm very grateful for that, for sure.
Wow, no, you became one of the great medical journalists of our time, and I'm so,
well, I don't know about that,
so impressed with what you've accomplished. Yeah.
Well, I really wanted to get you on the show to talk about not just this book, but the sort of, you've written 3 books now, and I gave this some thought beforehand. You have published more than 1,000 peer-reviewed papers, according to my research, several dozen textbooks, but at a certain point, I'm guessing in the last 10 years, you made a decision to write for a more general audience.
Right.
What brought you, I mean, you're doing so much, you've got so much else on your plate. Why did you want to do this type of writing?
Well, it's a great question. I never thought I would because I was in the comfort zone of writing in the medical microcosm. And then I started realizing, well, wait a minute now, isn't our job much bigger than that? I guess the first time I really wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in 2004, it was about the whole Vioxx affair.
Right, I remember it.
And I learned from that experience that you touch a lot of people and way outside your little world.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think then that I would write a book, but then I started realizing that whatever you can put into an op-ed, and I had several more after that,
sure.
It's just not enough. I mean, I love to write. In fact, that accounts for. I remember when I was a little kid, I wasn't such a good communicator with my parents, but I would write them long notes.
Get the message across, right?
Right. I could always write better than I could speak, I think. And so I started to realize that, wait a minute now, if I don't really have a chance to tell the whole story, you just lay it all out there, it'll all just be bottled up within me. So although I never thought I would do it, I actually decided when I wrote Creative Destruction that was going to be a worthwhile cause. That is, that we are just completely so behind in medicine. We need to get into the digital age. Right. And I said, well, I got to really put this together. And what I got this. I read a lot of books, so I had respected a lot of authors, and many of them, I could see where they use that book as a way to really lay out, the whole evidence, the whole vision.
And to bring these themes together and tie them in a way that other people haven't thought of.
Yeah, so that helped me. And then before I actually wrote a book, I decided I'd read a lot of books. I mean, more than ever. So that kind of gave me, a lot of extra anchoring.
Yeah, because as you say, or we said earlier, I think this is the 3rd book. There's Creative Destruction of Medicine. There was The Patient Will See You Now. And then this one, Deep Medicine, which came out earlier this year. You say at one point in this book about the 3 Ds, that the first one was digitization, second one democratization, and this one deep learning. So had you always planned to have 3 books? Or I'm thinking that much of what's in this, though, of course, has evolved in the time since you started the first one. So did you always know you had to write another one after you finished the first, or were you hoping you were done?
Well, it's a funny story. I have never really told it. But to do the first book, I had a really hard time. I mean, I couldn't get a publisher. A friend of mine referred me to a literary agent, which is as you, I think, know from writing a book yourself.
It's a whole different can of worms,
It's a Byzantine world where you have to go through all these rituals unless you self-publish, and I wasn't inclined to do that. So I had to get a literary agent. I failed a couple of those and finally got one that was willing to, give it a shot. And I put together a proposal, and that went through more iterations.
So you did that before you wrote the book?
Oh yeah,
Very wise.
I had one chapter, and I went through all these proposals. It was worse than writing any grant that I've ever written.
Oh, it's soul destroying.
And then the agent then put it to bid for 30 nonfiction I mean, she's really very well connected, and every one of them rejected the book.
Yeah.
Completely.
Okay. I love these stories. They're so, because it's just, people need to know how hard this is. It really is hard.
Well, there's somebody, Richard Horton of The Lancet, he recently wrote an editorial about we each should have an anti-CV, all the failures.
That's right.
And, learning from failures. And this was certainly a failure. So, because, as you know, I'm very persistent. So. Yep. There was one person only of all the different publishers who at least talked to me about the book. None of them, none of the others, they just flatly rejected. And I said, well, and so and I had told my agent, I said, I don't want to just write one book. I want to write 3 books.
Oh, so you got yourself in hot water right from the start.
I couldn't even get one book. Okay. So anyway, she told me, it's over, Eric. Maybe, it's a year or two. Maybe in a year or two we'll revisit this, but there's nothing I can do.
This was sort of the agent, not the...
Yeah, the agent. And so I decided, I had put so much work into this proposal. I had a lot of ideas. I had a chapter written and another one almost done. I said, I'm just not going to let this thing go. So I called that one publisher guy. His name was TJ, and I pitched it over the phone. I'll never forget the conversation. And, he said, well, let me give this a second look. Okay. And ultimately, he decided to publish the book. And then, actually, all 3 books were from the same publisher. But it was just that persistence. And then after I finished that darn book, I said, I'll never get another book again.
That's enough. Okay.
Because it's a lot of work, as you know. And it takes a lot out of you. And anyway, what happened was over time, there would be material things that would change in medicine, or at least where it was headed. So that's why
you couldn't get it all into one book. You had to push it off the next one.
I had to go into, as you pointed out, the second book really had to get into this whole idea that patients are going to get empowered, and we need to start respecting them and get rid of paternalism. And then, of course, since then there was what I think a lot of people had thought about AI, but it came.
It's been coming at a pace since the first book came out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had not foreseen how accelerated and potentially momentous it could change our field.
Sure. Although one of the themes in this book and your others is that these incredible technologies and developments are happening outside medicine, but medicine itself is moving at this glacial pace and not being absorbed. And I did wonder if that was one of the reasons why you wanted to reach a wider audience. You need to go beyond the doctors and the hospital administrators in order to kind of get the activism, perhaps, that's required. Was that part of it?
That's exactly right. So what I've learned from this experience is connecting with people well outside of medicine, in every sector, and finance and politics and all sorts of other people I'd never met, and a chance to really have a lot of great crosstalk.
Oh,
so
it seems like it. The
reach there is to get, I think, the changes that we need, which we have only seen a minimal of those. The ability to kind of get the conversation going and get people from outside of our little world, which we don't acknowledge enough. It's not just interventional cardiology, it's just medicine. It's just a tiny part of what the world's all about. So it helped broaden my horizons, and also to understand more about how, not just how difficult it is to change. I knew that, but maybe some ways to make inroads to achieve that.
Right. Do you think, because we do need to get more crosstalk, as you say, and medicine is such a silo. I feel that myself as a sort of peripheral, sort of parasitical role around medicine, but to what extent do you think doctors read this type of book? Do they think this is sort of for the general public and it's not for them, or do you feel that your colleagues are actually looking at this and rethinking some of the things they do?
Well, I do think there's a subset of doctors that do read books.
Yeah,
and they're
I wonder what that number is, but
I mean, it isn't the majority because they're so busy, and it's just hard to keep up with the balance of life.
Yeah.
But there is a significant fraction. I don't know what that percent is that really are into books, and so knowing to reach them. I mean, oftentimes this includes the cognoscenti and the people who are very influential, but also the thinkers. And I think that capturing their imagination is essential. But it's true, it's hard to reach people because that's actually part of the problem, is that the medical profession is at a nadir
Totally.
in terms of
Swamped with everything else.
disenchantment, the burnout and the depression and all the other features. And so, it isn't the time when people feel like, oh, I want to just get into this book, which, especially books that are, heavy into data and citations. I mean, they're not exactly fun reading.
No, but I do want to talk about that because this is an incredibly dense book. I mean, there's a huge amount. I'd love to talk about the amount of research and how you structured that to do it. But it is also a personal book, and it's also a very readable book, which, of course, for a medical journalist to know that a physician can write well, it's a terrifying prospect. Like, we need physicians to not be able to do that in order for us to have jobs. But I wondered about the sort of tone in this, because it's a didactic book in many ways, but it's also quite conversational, and you do it many times. This is what's interesting about the tone, is you address the reader directly, and you sort of, I am now going to tell you this, but it's not done in a way that's sort of it's a place of authority, but it's not a sort of frightening from on high. How hard did you work on that tone, and the decision to include yourself and some of your own anecdotes in here?
Right.
How did that come about?
That was learning. I mean, I think I'm a much better writer for the public now than I was when I did it the first book. And
I remember
I think,
you did it in the first book too, though. So
yeah, I did get personal, but I even showed more vulnerabilities here. Because the book starts with the kind of disastrous knee surgery replacement of that joint, and kind of what I learned from that. And but I also got into all sorts of other very personal stories, because in order to go deep into this whole area, I think it's important to relate these experiences.
The physician can also be a patient, and the physician also loses loved ones and those types of things.
And actually, because the other thing is, each of these books has a counterintuitive story, a creative destruction of medicine, or the patient will see you. And then this one is, hey, we're going to use technology to enhance humanity.
But you will not be obsolete. And
in order to do that, you have to be more human. I mean, so as the author, I really need to show that it culminates into deep empathy. But more than any thing I've ever written, this was really trying to get into the human touch, the human side of things, because that's what we need to get back to, and that's what we've lost. And it was through that knee surgery experience and other things that I related in the book that made me realize palpably how we've lost the human component of medicine.
That connection.
It's there sporadically and in little, exceptions, but it's not the rule as it should be, and it's why we went into medicine in the first place.
Yeah. No, I think we all have stories of the time that we have seen a healthcare provider of some sort who has gone the extra mile, and it just seems like such an exception to the norm, as opposed to the sort of empathy that you want and sort of are advising in many ways us to go back to in this book. And so creating that sort of vulnerability and writing about those things at this point in your non-fiction consumer writing career, that wasn't so hard. You felt you had that connection with the sort of unknown reader to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had even more stories, but the ones that I had to tell, I think they were very helpful to capture the imagination, the attention, and really
compassion.
I think that was essential, because I don't think that most people would not buy into the fact that you could use technology to make people act more human.
Sure, and that's one reason why doctors are perhaps fearful of incorporating more of it, I'm sure. Yeah,
oh, sure, and this whole lineage has been a difficult one, because the experience of doctors with a digital intrusion has been a disaster. I mean, electronic medical records is the worst.
It's a swear word in this case.
Right. So to try to say, hey, wait, put that in a special compartment, that's just horrendous. But then there's all these other things, and so that's been a lot of work. And for some, it's been repudiated, but for the most part, I think there's a sentiment that we can achieve this.
Okay. Well, I want to ask really briefly about process, because I'm hoping that some of our watchers are also trying to write books or thinking about it in the back of their minds. When on earth do you make time for this, and what is your sort of process? When do you write? Do you research everything and then write, or do you research as you go along? Briefly, what is it like to actually be a writer, to take off all your other hats and try to do this, draft one?
Right. Well, I do a lot of research for each of these 3 books. I spent at least a year of reading.
That's it? Oh my gosh. But it's 3 books since 2012. So.
This one took over 2 years of research.
I'm sure.
because I'm not a computer scientist and I really wanted to learn the field as best I could. So this one was a deeper dive into reading books. I must have read 20 books about AI.
Wow.
And then I also, for this one, as opposed to the others, which was was enriching, was I met with some of the gurus.
Which is part of what makes a story great, is that you have these personal encounters with them.
Yeah, I mean, that helps so much to get grounding about this field and what are the realities and the hype and whatnot. So I really spent a lot of time before I started writing. Now, I do all this cheating time. I mean,
I was going to say, do you sleep at all? Because it's
I wish I slept more. But what happens to me, actually, is when I get an idea about writing, I have a hard time sleeping because I want to write it down before you kind of lose it. Yeah, you probably experience that. At any rate, I mainly do this weekends, vacations, and then each of the books I've taken some, like a couple days a week for a couple months to try to, just devoted time. So yeah, it's never. I haven't had like a sabbatical to write a book. It's always trying to fit it into a kind of crazy life.
Yeah, it's really difficult for sure.
And the one thing that it does occur, I mean, I think anybody who does this seriously, it's like a hibernation. I mean, I lose a lot of time.
You need to retreat.
Yeah, your family. It's like, where is he going? He's going to write a book.
Don't talk to him right now. Yeah.
So fortunately, I have a very supportive family, and they know that this is like a what do you want to call it, a hobby or a love.
It's important
of mine.
to you.
Yeah.
You're driven to do this at this point. And I just, every now and then I do have this conversation with people, and they'll admit, I'd always wanted to do that. And I think, well, you do need to make other sacrifices in order to get it down on paper, and then, of course, to revise it and all those things. So, well, I think people are very lucky that you've written a third book, and I'm wondering about a fourth.
Oh, I have no aspiration.
I don't believe you after what you've
to write a fourth book. I don't rule it out. I mean, I needed some time to recover because this took so much out of me. But I don't have a topic. I don't have anything that moves me that I feel warrants this sort of extensive effort. If it does come along, I mean, if I see something over the years ahead, I'll certainly reconsider. But right now, it's kind of like a clean slate. We're in the early phases of the AI era.
Yes.
We'll see how that plays out, and if there's some other, I don't know anything, Shelley, that's as big as this in my,
That's something that you really take away from this book, that this is a sort of a tsunami coming.
Yeah, this, in 3+ decades in the practice of medicine and doing research, I've never seen anything that could have the transformative power of this. So this would be hard to surpass in terms of trying to lay out where we could go.
Yeah.
The question is to put energy into other things, like, for example, an organization of activism for medicine to accomplish this. That is, if we just sit by and
wait for it to happen,
it won't.
And you'll get the fragmented version that came with the electronic medical records as well.
Yeah. So this time, can we, as I wrote a piece in the New Yorker about, getting organized and trying to counter the usual default mode, which is more productivity, more efficiency, see more patients, look at more scans, but just the opposite, get the gift of time. So maybe putting in more of the extra time I have into something like that instead of, we'll see how it plays out, but I have no plan.
Well, we've barely delved into the actual book itself, but I do hope that people watching this program will be interested to go and pick it up. But it's such a pleasure for me to get to talk to you about it, so thank you for making time to come on the show.
Oh, enjoyed it. Thanks, Shelley.
And thank you for watching On Record.